You are not seeing this message by accident. Most people will hear a sentence like that and immediately dismiss it. They will call it coincidence because coincidence feels safer than responsibility. If everything is random, then nothing is expected from them. Nothing has to change. Nothing has to be questioned. They can continue drifting through life exactly as they always have. But deep down, you already know something different. You know there are moments in life that feel strangely timed. Certain ideas appear repeatedly, certain lessons return in different forms. Certain thoughts refuse to leave your mind no matter how hard you try to distract yourself. And lately, maybe you have felt that pressure building inside you, that strange sense that your old way of thinking no longer fits who you are becoming. That feeling is not weakness. It is alignment beginning. Most people spend years surrounded by noise without realizing that noise shapes their entire reality. They wake up distracted, they consume endless negativity, they react emotionally to everything around them. They allow fear, confusion, and uncertainty to dominate their thinking. Then they wonder why life feels heavy, chaotic, and directionless. Napoleon Hill understood something most people never truly grasp. Your mind is not passive. Your thoughts are not harmless. Your dominant mental state quietly shapes your attention, your behavior, your decisions, your confidence, your persistence, and eventually your entire direction in life. That is what frequency really means. Not magic, not fantasy, not pretending problems do not exist. Frequency is the condition of your mind. A fearful mind notices obstacles everywhere. A disciplined mind notices possibilities. A distracted mind misses opportunities. A focused mind recognizes them immediately. Two people can walk through the exact same world and experience completely different realities because their internal condition changes what they notice, what they believe, and how they respond. That is why some people stay trapped in cycles of negativity for years, while others slowly begin attracting better opportunities, stronger relationships, clearer thinking, and greater emotional stability. Their external world changes because their internal world changed first. And maybe that is exactly why you are here now, because something inside you has grown tired of mental chaos, tired of emotional exhaustion, tired of overthinking every decision, tired of feeling disconnected from your own potential. Most people never reach this point because distraction numbs them before reflection can transform them. They constantly escape into entertainment, noise, scrolling, gossip, and meaningless stimulation because silence forces them to confront themselves. But growth begins the moment a person becomes uncomfortable with remaining the same. That discomfort you feel lately may actually be evidence that your thinking is evolving. The truth is, emotionally strong people do not move through life without difficulty. They simply interpret difficulty differently. Where others see punishment, they see preparation. Where others panic, they pause. Where others collapse emotionally, they remain grounded enough to keep moving. This is not because life favors them. It is because their minds are trained differently. Your mental environment matters more than most people realize. What you repeatedly focus on becomes emotionally familiar. What becomes familiar starts shaping your identity, and identity quietly controls behavior. If you constantly feed your mind fear, comparison, negativity, and distraction, your emotional state begins reflecting that disorder. But when you intentionally train your mind toward clarity, discipline, purpose, patience, and focus, something begins changing internally. You stop reacting to life the same way. You begin seeing differently, and eventually you begin living differently. That is the real meaning behind being on the right frequency. It means your mind may finally be moving toward alignment instead of chaos. And once that alignment begins, your entire life can begin changing from the inside out. Most people believe their life is shaped primarily by external circumstances. They blame the economy, their childhood, bad luck, the wrong relationships, limited opportunities, unfair timing. And while circumstances absolutely matter, Napoleon Hill repeatedly emphasized that the human mind has a hidden tendency most people never fully recognize. It gradually becomes whatever it repeatedly concentrates upon. That single truth explains why some people remain trapped in cycles of negativity while others slowly transform their entire direction over time. Your dominant thoughts become emotional patterns. Your emotional patterns become behavioral habits. Your habits shape your decisions. Your decisions shape your future. This process happens quietly. That is why most people never notice it happening. A person does not suddenly wake up one morning confident, disciplined, focused, emotionally stable, and successful. Those qualities are built gradually through repeated internal conditioning. In the same way, emotional chaos is also built gradually. Fear repeated long enough becomes identity. Distraction repeated long enough becomes lifestyle. Negativity repeated long enough becomes personality. And once those mental states become familiar, people unconsciously recreate them over and over again. This is why some individuals seem permanently trapped in pessimism even when opportunities appear in front of them. Their mind has become conditioned to search for problems instead of possibilities. Their attention automatically moves toward what confirms their fears. Hill understood that attention is power. Whatever consistently controls your attention eventually influences your reality. That does not mean the universe magically rewards positive thoughts. It means your mental focus changes how you interpret situations, how you respond emotionally, what opportunities you notice, and whether you persist long enough to create meaningful results. A person operating from fear hesitates constantly. A person operating from confidence acts decisively. A person operating from emotional exhaustion avoids discomfort. A disciplined person tolerates discomfort long enough to grow. Behavior changes outcomes, and behavior is always connected to mental condition. That is why emotionally strong people protect their minds so carefully. Most people protect their money more than their attention, but attention determines the quality of everything else. Look carefully at modern life. People wake up immediately checking notifications. They consume arguments, outrage, bad news, comparisons, entertainment, and endless stimulation before their mind even fully wakes up. Then they spend the rest of the day wondering why they feel anxious, scattered, emotionally drained, and mentally weak. Because the mind absorbs what it repeatedly experiences. Mental environments shape emotional environments, and emotional environments shape behavior. Hill often spoke about definiteness of purpose because focused thinking organizes human energy. A distracted mind moves in 10 directions at once. A focused mind concentrates force. That concentration creates momentum. Most people never develop momentum because they constantly interrupt their own mental direction. They doubt themselves every few days. They change goals constantly. They let temporary emotions control permanent decisions. They allow external negativity to reprogram their internal state repeatedly. Then they wonder why life feels unstable. A person cannot build a strong future with a constantly scattered mind. This is why frequency should not be understood as mystical language. It is psychological alignment. It is the condition created when your thoughts, focus, emotional state, habits, and direction begin cooperating instead of fighting each other. When a person is internally divided, progress becomes exhausting. Part of them wants growth. Another part wants comfort. Part of them wants discipline. Another part wants distraction. Part of them wants confidence. Another part continuously rehearses fear. This internal conflict drains energy faster than hard work ever could. But when someone begins organizing their thinking intentionally, something changes. Their emotions stabilize. Their decisions improve. Their focus sharpens. Their reactions become calmer. Their actions become more deliberate. And eventually, their external life begins reflecting that internal order. Most people misunderstand successful individuals because they only see visible results. They see confidence, influence, discipline, calmness, financial growth, leadership, or emotional control. But they rarely see the years of invisible internal correction that created those qualities. The outer life is usually a delayed reflection of the inner life. That is why Hill insisted that success begins in thought long before it appears in physical reality. The problem is that modern culture trains people to seek constant stimulation instead of self-observation. Silence has become uncomfortable because silence exposes mental disorder. When a person finally sits alone without distractions, they often encounter anxiety, insecurity, confusion, unresolved emotions, and lack of direction. So they escape again. More scrolling, more noise, more distraction, more consumption. But distraction delays transformation. A person cannot hear themselves clearly while drowning in noise. The strongest individuals in history learned to develop internal order before external achievement. They trained themselves to think intentionally rather than react impulsively. They understood that emotional discipline creates power, and emotional discipline is becoming increasingly rare. Today, many people allow every event to control their emotional state. One criticism ruins their confidence. One setback destroys momentum. One failure convinces them they are incapable. One difficult season makes them emotionally collapse. But mentally aligned people operate differently. They still feel frustration. They still experience disappointment. They still face uncertainty. But they do not become psychologically controlled by temporary conditions. That distinction changes everything. Because once a person learns how to remain internally steady during external uncertainty, they stop living reactively. And reactive living is one of the greatest causes of long-term suffering. Most people spend their lives emotionally reacting instead of intentionally directing themselves. They react to criticism, react to fear, react to setbacks, react to social pressure, react to comparison, react to bad news, react to temporary emotions. Their inner world constantly shifts based on external conditions. But powerful people reverse this process. Instead of allowing circumstances to dictate identity, they train identity first. They deliberately choose what kind of thinker they will become, regardless of temporary conditions. This is why Hill emphasized autosuggestion, repetition, and focused thought so heavily. Repeated thinking conditions the subconscious mind, and the subconscious eventually influences automatic behavior. The thoughts you repeat daily matter. If you repeatedly tell yourself, "Nothing ever works for me," your mind begins searching for evidence to confirm that belief. If you repeatedly focus on failure, fear, rejection, limitation, and hopelessness, your emotional state gradually aligns with those expectations. And once expectations become emotionally believable, behavior follows them automatically. This is why hopeless people often stop recognizing opportunities even when opportunities exist. Their mental filter blocks possibility before action ever occurs. But when a person intentionally conditions themselves toward growth, resilience, discipline, patience, and possibility, their perception changes. They begin noticing solutions faster, recovering quicker, acting more confidently, persisting longer, thinking more clearly. Their frequency changes because their mental conditioning changes. That is the hidden difference between people who continually rise and people who continually drift. One group trains attention intentionally. The other allows attention to be captured constantly. One group protects emotional energy. The other leaks emotional energy everywhere. One group practices mental discipline. The other practices emotional reaction. And over years, those differences compound dramatically. Hill understood that repeated thoughts eventually become belief systems, and belief systems shape human behavior more powerfully than motivation ever will. Motivation is temporary, identity is powerful. When someone begins seeing themselves as disciplined, focused, emotionally strong, intentional, calm, and growth-oriented, they begin behaving consistently with that identity. That consistency creates momentum, and momentum changes lives. But here is what most people fail to realize. Alignment usually begins quietly, not dramatically. Often it begins as dissatisfaction. A person suddenly becomes tired of wasting time, tired of mental chaos, tired of emotional instability, tired of negativity, tired of feeling disconnected from purpose. That dissatisfaction is important because it signals awareness. And awareness is the beginning of transformation. Many people misinterpret this phase. They think something is wrong because old distractions no longer satisfy them. But often, that discomfort is evidence that growth has already started internally. The mind begins craving order after experiencing too much disorder. That is why certain ideas suddenly begin appearing repeatedly in someone's life at the exact moment they are ready to receive them. Not because of magic, but because attention changes. People notice what resonates with their current mental condition. A person obsessed with negativity notices reasons to complain everywhere. A person focused on growth notices lessons everywhere. A fearful person notices danger everywhere. A disciplined person notices opportunities for improvement everywhere. The external world reflects internal attention more than most people understand. And once someone realizes this, they stop asking, "Why is life happening to me?" They begin asking, "What am I repeatedly training my mind to notice, believe, and become?" That question changes everything, because life often moves in the direction of your strongest mental patterns, not instantly, not magically, but gradually, behaviorally, emotionally, and psychologically. That is why protecting your mind is one of the most important disciplines you will ever develop. Your attention shapes your thinking. Your thinking shapes your identity. Your identity shapes your future. And the moment you truly understand that, you stop treating your mind carelessly. You begin training it intentionally. That is when alignment begins becoming power. Once a person begins understanding that their mental condition shapes their behavior, emotions, and direction in life, a new responsibility appears. They can no longer live unconsciously, because awareness changes everything. Before awareness, distraction feels harmless. After awareness, distraction becomes dangerous. Before awareness, negative environments seem normal. After awareness, negative environments feel emotionally expensive. Before awareness, emotional reactions appear automatic. After awareness, emotional discipline becomes a personal responsibility. This is the stage where many people struggle the most, not because transformation is impossible, but because intentional living requires effort in a world designed to keep people mentally passive. Modern life constantly pulls attention outward. Everyone wants your focus, your emotions, your reactions, your energy. Advertisements compete for your mind. Social media competes for your attention. Negativity competes for your emotional state. Comparison competes for your confidence. And if a person does not consciously govern their mind, something else will. Hill understood that uncontrolled attention creates weak direction. A mind constantly reacting to external stimulation loses its ability to think independently. It becomes emotionally programmable. That is why so many people feel mentally exhausted today without understanding why. Their minds never rest. Their focus never stabilizes. Their emotions never settle. They consume more information than ever before, while possessing less clarity than ever before. Information alone does not create transformation. Focused interpretation creates transformation. A distracted person can listen to powerful ideas every day and still remain unchanged because their attention is fragmented. Nothing stays long enough to reshape identity. But when someone intentionally slows down and begins examining their thinking patterns honestly, they often discover something uncomfortable. Many of their thoughts are not even truly their own. They inherited fears from negative environments. They absorbed limiting beliefs from discouraged people. They adopted emotional reactions from repeated experiences. They unconsciously learned helplessness through constant comparison and disappointment. And after years of repetition, those patterns began feeling permanent. But they are not permanent. They are conditioned. And what has been conditioned can be retrained. That is one of the most important truths Napoleon Hill tried to communicate. Human beings possess the ability to redirect their mental condition deliberately, but most people never practice this consistently enough for transformation to occur. They want immediate emotional relief instead of long-term mental reconstruction. That is why temporary motivation fails so often. Motivation creates emotional excitement. Discipline creates identity change. Excitement fades quickly. Identity shapes behavior permanently. A person who relies entirely on emotion will remain inconsistent because emotions constantly fluctuate. But a person who trains disciplined thinking develops internal stability even when emotions shift. This is where real frequency begins changing. Not when someone feels temporarily inspired, but when they repeatedly choose intentional thoughts over automatic reactions. That process is not glamorous. In fact, most of it happens invisibly. It happens when a person interrupts negative thinking before it spirals, when they refuse to feed anxiety unnecessarily, when they stop rehearsing failure constantly in their imagination, when they protect their focus instead of allowing endless distraction, when they begin choosing better mental inputs daily. These small corrections appear insignificant at first, but repeated mental direction gradually changes emotional patterns, and emotional patterns shape behavior. For example, a person constantly rehearsing fear internally behaves differently without realizing it. They hesitate more, delay decisions, avoid discomfort, expect rejection, overanalyze opportunities, seek safety over growth. Meanwhile, someone conditioning themselves toward confidence, patience, discipline, and resilience behaves differently even before external success appears. They recover faster, persist longer, take more intentional action, remain calmer under uncertainty, continue moving despite discomfort. The external difference eventually becomes dramatic, but the internal difference began quietly long before anyone noticed. This is why emotionally strong individuals seem almost different from everyone else during difficult seasons. They do not interpret adversity the same way. Most people see obstacles and immediately personalize them. This means I'm failing. This means life is against me. This means I'm not capable. But mentally disciplined people interpret challenges differently. This is uncomfortable, but temporary. This is teaching me something. This is preparing me. This does not define my future. That interpretation changes emotional response, and emotional response changes behavior. A person overwhelmed emotionally becomes inconsistent quickly. A grounded person maintains direction longer, and consistency is more powerful than intensity. Many people destroy their future because they cannot emotionally survive slow progress. They expect immediate evidence that their effort is working. When results remain invisible for too long, discouragement takes over. But Hill repeatedly emphasized persistence because persistence survives the invisible phase of growth. Almost all meaningful transformation happens internally before it appears externally. Confidence develops before visible achievement. Discipline strengthens before major results. Mental resilience grows before opportunity expands. Identity changes before circumstances change. But because external evidence lags behind internal growth, many people quit too early. They abandon progress during the exact stage where transformation is quietly forming beneath the surface. That is why emotional control matters so much. A person unable to manage temporary emotions will constantly interrupt long-term progress. Fear interrupts consistency. Impatience interrupts growth. Comparison interrupts confidence. Negativity interrupts focus. But emotionally aligned individuals protect their mental condition carefully because they understand something most people ignore. Your internal state influences the quality of your external decisions every single day. This is why successful people often appear calmer than everyone else, not because their lives are easier, but because emotional stability improves perception. A panicked mind sees fewer solutions. An anxious mind notices more danger than opportunity. A distracted mind overlooks important details. An emotionally exhausted mind struggles to think long term. But a calm mind interprets situations more clearly. Calmness is not weakness. Calmness is control. And control creates power. That is why emotionally disciplined people rarely waste energy reacting to everything around them. They understand that attention is limited. Emotional energy is limited. Focus is valuable. Most people scatter their energy across hundreds of meaningless concerns every week. Arguments, comparison, online negativity, temporary drama, fear about situations they cannot control. Then they wonder why they feel mentally weak when important opportunities finally appear. Their energy has already been exhausted by distraction. But aligned individuals simplify their focus intentionally. They become selective about what enters their mind because they understand mental input eventually becomes emotional condition. What you repeatedly consume emotionally shapes your internal environment. This is why negative environments quietly weaken ambition. A person surrounded constantly by pessimism, gossip, fear, cynicism, and emotional chaos gradually absorbs those emotional standards without realizing it. Hill understood the power of environment deeply. Human beings unconsciously adapt to the emotional expectations surrounding them. If everyone around you normalizes negativity, discipline becomes difficult. If everyone around you normalizes distraction, focus becomes rare. If everyone around you normalizes mediocrity, ambition feels uncomfortable. But when someone intentionally places themselves around growth-oriented thinking, emotionally disciplined people, purposeful conversations, and intentional habits, transformation accelerates. Not magically, psychologically, because emotional standards spread socially. That is why frequency is deeply connected to environment. Your mental condition is influenced by what repeatedly surrounds you. This includes the people you listen to, the conversations you tolerate, the media you consume, the thoughts you repeat, the emotional patterns you rehearse daily. Eventually, these inputs shape your emotional baseline, and emotional baselines shape identity. A person repeatedly exposed to hopelessness begins expecting disappointment automatically. A person repeatedly exposed to growth-oriented thinking begins expecting possibility automatically. Expectation changes action, and action changes outcome. This is why two people with equal talent often produce completely different lives. One person becomes emotionally conditioned toward growth, while the other becomes emotionally conditioned toward fear. The difference compounds over years. Hill understood that successful individuals are not simply more talented. Often they have trained themselves to maintain productive mental states longer than most people can tolerate. They persist longer, focus longer, recover faster, control emotional reactions better, protect direction more consistently. These qualities create enormous advantage over time, and none of them require perfection. That is another misunderstanding people have about mentally strong individuals. They imagine confidence means never struggling internally, but confidence is often built through repeatedly continuing despite internal struggle. Emotionally aligned people still experience fear, still experience doubt, still experience uncertainty, but they no longer allow temporary emotional states to permanently control identity. That distinction changes everything. Most people become whatever they feel in the moment. If they feel discouraged, they act defeated. If they feel uncertain, they stop moving. If they feel anxious, they avoid action. But disciplined thinkers separate temporary emotion from permanent identity. They understand. I can feel fear without becoming controlled by fear. I can experience uncertainty without surrendering direction. I can struggle emotionally without abandoning growth. That emotional maturity creates resilience. And resilience creates long-term advantage, because life rarely rewards people who require perfect emotional conditions before taking action. Growth often demands movement during uncertainty. This is why so many people remain trapped, waiting for confidence before acting. But confidence usually appears after repeated action, not before it. Action reshapes identity, and identity changes frequency. The more someone proves to themselves that they can remain focused, disciplined, emotionally stable, and intentional during difficult periods, the stronger their self-trust becomes. That self-trust changes how they walk through life. They stop needing constant reassurance. Stop panicking over temporary setbacks. Stop interpreting every obstacle as catastrophe. Instead, they begin expecting themselves to adapt, recover, and continue. That expectation becomes power. And eventually, others notice it too. Not because the person became magically successful overnight, but because internal alignment changes presence. Focused people feel different. Grounded people feel different. Emotionally disciplined people feel different. Their energy becomes calmer. Their decisions become clearer. Their reactions become steadier. And over time, that internal order begins influencing every area of life: relationships, opportunities, leadership, discipline, focus, financial growth, personal peace. Because external life eventually reflects repeated internal condition. That is why this message matters. Not because you need fantasy, not because you need fake positivity, not because the universe magically rewards certain people, but because your mind is either being programmed intentionally or accidentally every single day. And the moment you realize you can consciously direct that process, your life begins changing from the inside outward. That is the real meaning of being on the right frequency. At the end of the day, the phrase right frequency is not about magic. It is about alignment. It is about becoming aware that the quality of your thoughts, your focus, your emotional reactions, and your internal discipline are quietly shaping the direction of your life every single day. Most people never realize this. They spend years reacting emotionally to circumstances without understanding that repeated reactions become identity. They allow fear to dominate attention. They allow negativity to shape perspective. They allow distractions to weaken focus. And over time, their external life begins reflecting that internal disorder. Then they wonder why life feels heavy. But there comes a moment in certain people's lives where something shifts internally. They become tired of chaos, tired of overthinking, tired of emotional instability, tired of feeling disconnected from their own potential. And that moment matters more than most people realize. Because transformation rarely begins with external success. It begins with internal awareness. The awareness that your attention matters, your environment matters, your thoughts matter, your emotional discipline matters. Napoleon Hill understood that successful people are not simply lucky people. They are individuals who gradually train themselves to think differently, respond differently, and persist differently long before visible results appeared. That is why emotionally strong people seem calmer during uncertainty. They are not free from difficulty. They simply no longer interpret every obstacle as destruction. They understand that temporary discomfort does not define permanent direction, and that mindset changes behavior. A fearful person hesitates. A grounded person proceeds carefully but consistently. A distracted person loses direction easily. A focused person keeps returning to what matters. A negative mind notices reasons to quit. An intentional mind notices opportunities to grow. Over time, these differences compound into completely different lives. That is why your mental condition deserves protection. Not because you must become perfect. Not because you should ignore reality. Not because life suddenly becomes easy. But because your internal state influences how you experience reality itself. The thoughts you repeat become emotional patterns. The emotional patterns become habits. The habits become identity, and identity quietly shapes destiny. That is why alignment begins internally first. Before external success appears, thinking changes. Before confidence becomes visible, self-trust develops quietly. Before life feels different externally, emotional reactions become more disciplined internally. This process is slow, quiet, invisible at first. But invisible growth is still growth. The strongest people you admire were not born emotionally stable, focused, or resilient. They trained themselves gradually. They learned to guard their attention, to interrupt destructive thinking, to remain steady during uncertainty, to continue moving when emotions fluctuated. And eventually, that discipline became identity. You can do the same, not overnight, not through fantasy, not through pretending problems do not exist, but through intentional mental conditioning, repeated consistently over time. That is how frequency changes. You stop feeding your mind constant negativity. That you stop rehearsing failure automatically. You stop allowing distraction to dominate attention. You stop identifying with fear every time it appears. Instead, you begin directing your thoughts deliberately. You begin protecting your focus, choosing your environment carefully, managing emotional energy intentionally, building internal stability daily. And slowly, your life begins responding differently because you are responding differently. That is the deeper truth most people miss. The external world often changes after the internal world changes first. So if this message reached you at a moment where you feel different lately, more aware, more uncomfortable with remaining the same, more tired of mental chaos and emotional exhaustion, that may not be accidental. It may simply mean your mind is beginning to align with a different future. And once a person becomes internally aligned with growth, discipline, focus, emotional control, and purpose, their entire life can begin moving in a different direction. Not instantly, not perfectly, but steadily, one thought, one decision, one disciplined day at a time. And perhaps that is the real sign you are on the right frequency after all.